There's an alternate history where Trump never got interested in Obama's birth certificates, quietly retired from TV after a while, and then roared back as a wildly popular MC for America's 250th birthday party, and subsequently died a universally admired entertainer. Welcome to the Atlantic Current. I'm Tull from the Irish Politics newsletter, and here's always with Vince Martin from Wall Street and Maine. Vince, where's that quote from?
That quote comes from a tweet from 2024 by Bern Hobart. He's an outstanding writer on finance who occasionally slips over into politics and culture. It's a tweet I bookmarked at the time. I've had it bookmarked since because it spoke to an idea that I was playing with at the time, and I've done so since, on the idea of Donald Trump as a person. What a really incredible and fascinating story that is. And it's a story that has been obscured by his political career.
We've talked about that in an episode way back in the beginning, the idea that there are two characters of pre-politics Donald Trump, either a massively successful billionaire or a fraudulent, bankrupt con man. I think you know what side of the fence I'm coming down on.
I will say, those two versions of the story, they can't both be true. And in fact, when you are looking at him, again, solely as a person, I don't think either one is the truth. But because he generates so much political news and hype and discussion, the truth of the 40 plus years he spent as a public figure before 2015, I don't think get explored anymore. And they should be, because his life is incredibly fascinating. It's absurd and frustrating and silly. And in some ways, on occasion, it's impressive. Even ignoring the run to the presidency, I think it's one of the most interesting biographies of the post-war American period. And that is why I've had that tweet bookmarked. That's why I've been playing with this idea for so long. And we are going to try and sit down and cover that biography. The very ambitious, no doubt multi-part, multi-angle series that we're going to start rolling out here today.
Do you think Hobart is right about how that alternate history might have played out?
Perhaps. I like the broader idea. I don't know that he ever quite becomes beloved. I think to some extent, even his critics often overestimate his reputation during his heyday and why he generated so much attention. But that also gets to Hobart's point, which is that people like this, who are in the public eye for that long, as they age, we naturally soften our view towards them, right? The bad things that they did kind of fade. Nostalgia takes over. And I think he's broadly right in the sense that there absolutely is a world, there is a universe where Trump in his 70s and 80s is seen as a grandfatherly figure, a throwback entertainer to a different era, to the pre-internet, pre-social media world. You can imagine a period where his career as essentially an entertainer, and we're going to talk more about this, but it is worth pointing out, he is more of an entertainer than he is a businessman. Right. He is a guy playing a businessman way, way more often than he is somebody being a businessman. And you can see that sense getting reevaluated. You can imagine a profile in the New Yorker in 2022. They go down to Florida, where one of New York City's great characters is in retirement, and he's telling stories about the old days, and you have no idea if he's lying or not, but that's not the point, right? Or like a prestige drama on Netflix, it's a lightly fictionalized version of his story. Maybe you get Trump himself to be the narrator, so it's a meta commentary on capitalism and marketing and truth. But at the very least, I think in Hobart's alternate universe, Donald Trump gets his due as an entertainer and as a cultural figure, because I think at least a few people start to credit Donald Trump as being the godfather of reality television, or, as I put it a couple episodes ago, the first reality television character long before he or anyone else had a reality show. I think you have to say that he has had a real impact on American culture. And I know as a fan of reality television yourself, you're grateful for that, Tom.
Yes, I'm the biggest fan of reality TV. 4 women, yeah. Look, I think the genius of reality TV is that it turns human misery into kind of a scheduling format, doesn't it? Every emotion must be legible, every breakdown timed to the ad break, every kiss arranged like a hostage negotiation conducted by a branding consultant. Nothing can simply happen. It's all content. And what the media has got from Trump is content. Even now into his presidency, everything he does is content.
Yeah. that gets to my point. That idea of creating content out of whatever is available, whether it's real or not. I think whether it's dramatic or not, where you can build that connection to Donald Trump being a true cultural innovator, right? If you wanted to do one of those retrospective takes, you can draw a line, I think, from Donald Trump to YouTube, to influencers. That is what he did. When he reached the public eye, as you put it so well, he is constantly creating content in a way that I don't think people really had before. And certainly no one had built a career as an entertainer doing it that way. And now, of course, we have thousands of people literally all over the world doing essentially what Donald Trump was doing in 1977 and 1984. And again, in this alternate universe, in this world where you try and step away from the politics, you can so easily imagine people looking back on what he did in a very different way than they do now. So in addition to the fact that I think his life is just fascinating on the merits, I think his pre-political career does have influence that probably isn't appreciated. And there's another aspect of this, which I don't think I fully understood until we were putting this together, which is Donald Trump's life bumps up against, reflects, or is shaped by just so many of the major trends in post-World War II America. I think that you can literally tell the story of America over his 80 years using his biography as the central structure. And we're not going to try and quite pull something that audacious off. But he does wind up in the middle of trends that, looking back, really resonate to this day. And if you're familiar with the novel and the movie from the 1990s with the character whose name rhymes with that of the president, there is a sense where he's kind of almost like a broader, longer-term version of Forrest Gump.
Yes, only less intelligent, but to your... Back to our content there, what you were saying, like you've Trump casinos, Trump steaks, Trump University, Trump books, socks, shirts, ties. He had merch before merch was a thing.
That's another fantastic point, a way that he was ahead of his time, tying merchandise to a person, right? Not to a film series, not to
a sports team or anything
not to
like
a sports.
That.
Yep,
it's just exactly. A single individual.
Yeah, that's a really fascinating way to put it too. Now, to be clear, we're not doing this to rehabilitate his reputation. You've taken two pot shots. You've taken two pot shots at him in 10 minutes. A couple of weeks ago, we did an episode on the dumbest things he's ever said. So that's not the point. Again, if you can step away from the politics, which I know for many people is hard, it is a fascinating story and a story that says so much about post-war America, which ironically means it's a story that explains how we wound up with Donald Trump as president of the United States, not once, but twice. And I think we can start at the beginning. We are recording this just a couple days after Donald Trump's 80th birthday.
And the man has lived such a rich life. Famously, he said dodging HIV and AIDS in the 1980s was his Vietnam.
Yeah.
And his diet of McDonald's. I'm surprised the man is still alive at all, to be perfectly honest.
There are some dangers along the way, even though his life does seem quite protected and often soft. But yeah, he has just turned 80 years old. He is the second oldest president in American history.
Who was the oldest?
Joe Biden, of course,
Biden,
his predecessor.
Okay.
Yeah, Biden, I think, was 82 or 83 when he left. Yeah, Biden was the oldest. If Trump completes his term, no jokes, Tull. This is how Americans get visits from the FBI nowadays. If Trump completes his term, he will become the oldest president in American history by a couple months over Biden. It is stunning to think Donald Trump is older than Bill Clinton, who was elected president in 1992. He is older than Dan Quayle, who was elected vice president in 1988.
Whoa.
Yeah. So about half of Americans were not alive when Dan Quayle was elected vice president. And Donald Trump is older than Dan Quayle. He is born in Queens, a borough of New York City, a native New Yorker. You will hear people ask why Trump has this disdain and occasional hatred for, quote unquote, the elites. You know, people make the point that why does a billionaire New Yorker hate the elites? If you're not familiar with New York, Queens now, and particularly then, is probably not what a lot of people think of when they think of New York City, right? It is blue collar, working class, neighborhood oriented, not at all glamorous. It is a nice place, certainly. He will grow up in basically the nicest neighborhood in Queens. But it's not glamorous. It's not Manhattan. To this day, people in Manhattan use the epithet bridge and tunnel.
Okay, I've heard of the tunnel, yeah.
Yeah. And that's basically you are coming into Manhattan for work from one of the other four boroughs or from northern New Jersey or Westchester County in New York State, right? You're taking a bridge or a tunnel to get there. And so you don't quite count in Manhattan is kind of the implication there, right?
You're a parvenu.
The real money, the real power, the real people are in Manhattan. Everyone else is just kind of playing along. It's kind of like Cork in Ireland, right?
Yeah, I mean, I'm getting the impression there that you're saying people in Manhattan are like the Dublin cocktail party circus that spends its time sneering at people from West Cork is what I think what you're saying there, Vincent, is it?
There's a little bit of that. Sneering is a little tough, but I think it's just more the sense that, if you've really made it, you're in Manhattan. That has changed a little bit. Some neighborhoods in Brooklyn and stuff have been cool. But yeah, certainly in 1946 and 1950s and 60s when Trump is growing up, Manhattan is glamorous in a way that Queens isn't. That trope in so many American stories, fictional, non-fictional, and of course stories globally of the boy in the small town seduced by the glitz and glamour of the big city. It seems bizarre to say that applies to Donald Trump, but I think it actually does apply a little bit. From a very early age, it seems like he has his eyes set on Manhattan.
So what you're saying there is the bridge and tunnel sneer is the last acceptable ethnic slur in New York, is it?
At some point, it no doubt was, because the outer boroughs were much more ethnic, including in Donald Trump's time. Nowadays, Manhattan, it's less ethnic and more class, but it's not even like class that most of us would recognize. It's a sliver of class in the upper crust, right? That you're just a little cooler than the other guy at J.P. Morgan Chase bringing home a $1.8 million bonus.
So it's class contempt dressed up as geography. Yeah. Okay.
Yeah, sure. Yeah, we'll go that way. Everybody wants to have class contempt, and they just need a reason to do it. This is the reason in the five boroughs.
So he didn't. What you're saying there is he didn't summer with the right people. He didn't go to the right schools in the right way. He's a parvenu.
A little bit. He's not high society Manhattan. As we'll talk about in just a second, his father is incredibly wealthy. His father is nearly as wealthy, if not as wealthy, as the top families in Manhattan. But it's a different kind of wealth. And again, that's a global story too, right? Money and class don't get exchanged one for one. And you can see that, I think, a little bit in how Trump views the world to this day. But yes, his father, Fred, is a wealthy man. He is a builder of single family homes and later apartment buildings, mostly in the New York area, although he winds up with projects in multiple other cities across the United States. His mother, Mary Trump, incredibly enough, given Donald Trump's political rhetoric, is an immigrant.
Yes, Scottish immigrant.
Yep.
Wonderful hair. Massive.
They don't make women's hair the way they used to. It really is a shame. Everything's gone to hell. Yeah, she's an immigrant. She speaks Scottish Gaelic. Fred Trump is a second-generation immigrant. He inherited kind of a small family real estate business, which was built in part through the wealth his father had amassed moving to Alaska in the gold rush and running a restaurant and a store that supplied miners and stuff. So they are wealthy by the time Donald's born. He's the fourth of five children. The oldest child is Mary Ann. She will become known as Mary Ann Trump Barry. And believe it or not, she actually becomes a federal judge.
Oh.
Yeah.
So she's the brains of the operation. All the brains went to her in the family, was it?
She is, I think, a pretty impressive woman. She goes to college, gets married, has children, stays at home and raises them, as you did in that time, in the 1960s. Then she goes back to school, gets her law degree, and she is nominated as a district court judge by Ronald Reagan in 1983. So long before Donald Trump enters politics. In 1999, she's promoted to the Court of Appeals. So, yeah, I think a very interesting, very competent woman There are two black marks on here, which are worth noting in the context of Donald's biography. The first is...
Just two.
I honestly do think just two. These are the two that we know about. But look, she was a federal judge for 35 years while her brother was famous. If she was a bad judge or she was doing controversial things, it would have been news. And it's worth noting that when she gets promoted to the Court of Appeals, she's confirmed by the Senate unanimously. So it does seem like she was a pretty impressive woman with a solid track record as a judge. There are some questions about how she got that job because in 2018 and 2019, Donald Trump's niece, also named Mary, surreptitiously records about 15 hours of conversation that she had with Marianne. And in those conversations, Marianne discloses that when she was trying to get nominated for the court, she had Donald Trump and his lawyer, a man named Roy Cohn, who we will talk about in a bit, who is just so evil he's almost boring. In the modern world, we're used to seeing bad guys and trying to assign them layers or trying to assign them origin stories. He just seems like just...
Cartoonishly so. Cartoonishly.
Yeah. I mean, he is kind of Bond villain. I was going to say he's a Bond villain, but he's actually more the Bond villain's lawyer in the deleted scene. Marianne admits that they helped her get the nomination. I don't think that's a huge black mark. As you know, that's kind of the way the world works. There are a lot of district court judges.
It's the way it works in the USA. It's the way it works in the USA, Vincent, because you might be surprised to find that we actually have rules over here about this kind of thing.
What? I mean, we have rules too. I mean, they're printed rules, but look,
in air quotes, they're air quotes.
Yeah. There's Donald Trump's cultural impact right there, right? Me legitimately telling you with a straight face, they broke the rules. Come on, man. Who really follows the rules? That's not how it works.
It's quite pithy.
There's a lesson there. But in any case, she gets the job that way. Although, again, in her defense, by all accounts, she does perform admirably. In 2011, she takes senior status, and that's basically semi-retirement, right? They're not handling a full load of cases. When Trump is inaugurated, she goes on fully senior status. She's basically done hearing cases, but 2 years later, she retires. And the reason that she retires is she's facing a potential ethics investigation.
Oh, God, ethics.
Yeah.
Ethics is the worst thing that can happen to anybody in politics or in public life. Ethics is a terrible thing. Bertie Ahern over here got tripped up by ethics. So
yeah.
Ethics will always get you in the end. Yeah,
and it's doubly bad for a judge, right? Yeah. That's always a bad, it's one thing if a politician is unethical. You can't go, hey, the judge who is sentencing people to 30 years in prison, you would hope has some ethics. Her investigation stems from an article published in the New York Times the year before, which of course has a very significant impact on Donald Trump as well. The Times reports that Fred Trump, over a span of years, had used very questionable, if not outright illegal, tax practices to funnel money to his children.
I do the same, in fairness.
Yeah, I kind of.
I mean, who wouldn't do that for their kids? In fairness,
yeah. I give my kid, $80 in cash every month. I don't tell the IRS I'm not paying my gift tax on it. This is a more significant sum. The Times estimates that in 2018 currency, it was over $1 billion.
Whoa.
Yeah. When we said Fred Trump was wealthy, we were not exaggerating. This article is obviously published because it centers on Donald Trump, who's president of the United States at the time. And this article is published because Mary Trump, niece to Donald and Marianne, has gone to the Times with literally boxes of Trump family tax returns. That's where this article came from.
She has a popular Substack as well, where she rails against Donald Trump all the time, doesn't she? She's quite an anti-Trump figure in her own right.
She despises Donald Trump in the way that you can kind of only really despise a family member, right? There is like that level to it. And yes, she has a Substack. She wrote a book in 2021 going against Trump. She recorded Marianne without her permission, without her knowledge, which is legal in New York State. It's not legal actually in most places. Recorded those interviews as part of her book. She took all the tax returns to the Times, and she has said publicly, unequivocally, that she is doing all this to stop Donald Trump, to end his political career. That is her goal. That has been her goal for 8 or 9 years now. We'll talk a little bit more in a bit about where that dripping, seething hatred comes from. But in this case, Mary Trump's efforts to bring down Donald quite obviously ricochet onto Marianne because she has received millions and millions of dollars through the same structures. And so she retires for good in 2019, which forestalls the ethics investigation before she passes in 2023. Fred Jr. is the second child, first boy. We'll talk about him in a moment. He is followed by Elizabeth, now Elizabeth Trump Grau, whose public profile is so limited and so thin that it is legitimately shocking. In the modern world, we know absolutely nothing about her. We know her name. We know that she used to work at a major bank in New York, and she evidently lives in Florida. Other than that, literally, you can scour I don't even know how that's possible in this day and age. It is easier to find far more information about me.
I have to admit, Vincent, I never heard of her before.
I had not heard of her either.
I heard of Fred. I heard of Marianne. I heard of her mother. I've never heard of this guy or this lady.
Yeah, I'll admit that when I started this, I'm not sure I knew she existed. I hadn't really thought through it. It's not, when we're not doing podcasts, I don't really spend too much time thinking about the Trump family and Queens in the 1950s. Yeah, I think if you had asked me before we started this, how many siblings does Trump have, I would have said 3. I mean, it is legitimately impressive if you Google her, that there's just nothing on her when she's the sister of a man who has been famous to some degree for 50 years now. I cannot imagine how many times that woman has said no comment. There's an impressive discipline to it, that no journalist in the world has been able to get through to her because that pretty much every journalist has called her at some point, particularly the last 11 years. But
she sounds like a woman with a lot of secrets, Vincent. I usually find it's that old trope, it's the quiet ones you need to watch out for. But in politics,
yeah, it's true in bar fights too.
Yeah, it's always the quiet guys you need to watch out for, the quiet people, because they usually know where the bodies are buried.
I'm not sure whether this matter of secrets or if she just, for whatever reason, decided that, she wants nothing to do with publicity with the outside world. Donald is the fourth, as I said, and then the baby of the family is Robert, who is 2 years younger.
Never heard of him.
He's interesting. We will talk about him a little bit. He is very much the younger brother, the sidekick to Donald, starting at a young age and continuing on for essentially his entire life. He passed away during Donald Trump's first term. He is part of Donald's story. Fred Jr. very much is part of Donald's story. The sisters, I think, honestly, kind of not so much.
Yeah, I wonder, is that a little bit Trump's sexism shining through there? I wonder.
It's a sexist house, and that is something that a lot of Trump's biographers point out. Donald Trump's niece, Mary, will say later that Fred Trump Sr. kind of almost just wasn't interested in the girls.
Right.
And Donald Trump's mother fell very severely ill when Donald was about 2.5 years old after Robert was born. She very nearly died. She had some sort of postpartum complication and kind of was never really the same. And there are some biographers who do the psychoanalysis thing, that Donald Trump's mother physically went away for a while when he was 2.5 and then kind of didn't quite have the energy, the enthusiasm, the joy that you would hope a mother would have. That creates a sense of abandonment in some stories, which explains his subsequent behavior. And it also leads him to more strongly gravitate towards his father and his father's worldview.
Which is what exactly?
Fred Trump Sr. is very much an American archetype, the man for whom work and competition and success are everything, right? It's the workaholic personality. It is the man who defines himself by what he does in the business world. And again, he's good at it. He's impressive. I think by the 1950s, as Donald's growing up, he's probably worth in modern dollars a few $100 million. It's hard to kind of to really pin that down, obviously, but he starts as a home builder. After World War II, the GIs are coming home. Business is good. He moves into building apartment buildings, moves down to Virginia and builds government housing. Back to New York. The federal government after World War II is flooding the country with money to build houses, to provide college education for GIs, to build our interstate highway system. all these sorts of things. And Fred is a huge beneficiary of a lot of those funds. Too much of a beneficiary. He winds up in 1954 testifying in front of the U.S. Senate. There's a scandal on how some of these subsidies for apartment construction are set up, because they're set up in a way that builders essentially can't lose, and in some cases don't even build the project. They just basically take money from the government, or at least are able to take the money long before any tenant walks through the door. He testifies from the Senate, and the next year he's actually barred from taking money from the Federal Housing Authority as a result. And again, if you want to do the psychoanalysis thing, you can see Trump's worldview kind of form in that, right? The sense that government is supposed to be there to help you individually. And I think also in his defense to help people more broadly. We've talked about that. I think there's part of him that thinks that he is helping people who have been wronged. It's just many of his critics don't believe that those are the people who have actually been wronged, but also the sense that the government can be vindictive. Everything we know about Fred Trump pretty strongly suggests that he had some things to say about what he no doubt saw as persecution by the government, which happened when Donald Trump was 9 years old.
Yeah.
So,
yes.
yeah.
Yeah, well, it's very hard to psychoanalyze history, isn't it? But I mean,
yeah,
you can almost see a shining through in Trump. His outlook on the world in his formative years are obviously shaped by what he's perceived as a government persecution against the family. And
weaponization.
It's never gone away, has it?
Right?
He probably feels it's never gone away.
He has said multiple times that it's never gone away. They are always going after Trump. That has been his knee-jerk response to everything, to every bit of legal trouble he's ever been in, including an infamous case that happens about 15 years later. Like you said, it is hard to psychoanalyze anybody, particularly through admittedly foggy sources and old recollections. But it's also fun to try and psychoanalyze people.
Exactly.
And yeah, it's great. I'm not going to lie. And in this case, man, the themes that are there, they really do jump out as you do that, whether it's the nature of his parents, whether it's the nature of Fred's business. But there really is one huge difference between Fred Trump Sr. and Donald Trump, which is, again, Fred Trump as a businessman. I mean, when you read about it, you are impressed just simply from the standpoint of how efficient and how organized he is. He builds this business, which again, I think no doubt is worth hundreds of millions of dollars by the mid-1950s. Even accounting for help/slush funds from the government, he runs this entire business basically by himself. It's him and a secretary handling all this.
Right.
When the business blows up, he winds up with a little office over in Brooklyn, but he is at the sites. He is on top of the regulators. He is on top of the politics. In that American archetype, which some people don't find quite as inspiring as us Americans do.
Yeah, is that a slight dig at me, Vincent?
Not necessarily you, but
Europe in general.
What was the exchange we had? You said you called something hyper-capitalism. And I was like, that's just capitalism, man. this is what we do. But yeah, I mean, in all seriousness, he's a serious, legitimate guy in business. He is impressive. It is impressive what he pulls off, and it is impressive that he largely pulls it off by himself. We also said up front that Trump kind of highlights major trends in America, and there are two in his upbringing that I think still resonate in American culture and politics today. The first is that his childhood, other than the health issues for his mother, I think seems pretty idyllic for the first 13 years. He lives in a nice neighborhood. He has said that it was kind of an oasis from the rest of Queens, which he called rough. He is out constantly exploring. He's constantly with friends. He's 10, 11 years old. He's taking the subway into Manhattan. Think if you look at what he says about it, and even what people around him say about it, it is a time where he, by and large, he is taken care of. I mean, they have chauffeurs and servants. They're exceptionally wealthy, but he is taken care of. He is popular. And society feels orderly and organized and safe. And I can tell you anecdotally that a lot of people of his generation in America, many of whom come to be his political supporters later on, they share that belief that those years are the golden period for America, that there is a peak. There is a reason why Donald Trump's campaign slogan, which he stole from Ronald Reagan, who also captured quite bit of baby boom support is make America great again. You can see in his politics and in his support a sense that this is when America was great, right? The successful GIs are back. The families are together. The kids are in the parks and they're on the subways and they're living in these wonderful homes that the likes of Fred Trump Sr. built. And from that point, everything goes to
Right. Okay. I think if you ask Gen Zs, baby boomers, whatever they're screaming at themselves these days in the mirrors, go through each generation and there's a cohort of people think it's the greatest generation ever. And there's another cohort of people that think things have never been more terrible in all our lives.
Yeah.
This goes through each generation, but I do think that was at the height of Pax Americana.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah. Now, granted, we are also at war in Korea, but we've talked about that before. The Americans kind of decided not to pay attention or remember that one. Literally called the Forgotten War.
You know, I think the United States was at the height of its powers and expanding rapidly as an industrial nation. And, you know, people's standards of living were incredibly high compared to today.
Yeah.
And there is an element of looking back and fondness and thinking, you know, why can't we get back there again? You know, these people never factor in economics or globalization or any of these things, but it probably was at the very, very height of Pax Americana, I think. So that's why it probably feels so nostalgic for people of Trump's generation.
Yeah. Now they're also alighting the fact that those people were by and large white people and straight people. You know, there is that sense where everything was great. Everything was wonderful. Everything was safe. You know, okay. Well, I mean, there were a lot of people for whom that was not true. But I mean, I remember as a much younger man being half drunk with my dad and asking him, you know, if the 1950s were as good as the stereotype, you know, as people suggested. And my father was not the kind of man who would just kind of say that if it wasn't true. And he was, I mean, you could see the nostalgia on his face. I mean, it was, you know, what a wonderful time. And he was a child whose home life, obviously we're not going to go into details, but his home life was not particularly easy. So, yeah, I mean, that's just a thing. And I really honestly don't think you can understand current politics without kind of getting a sense of that. That sense is so strong that younger people who have come to support Trump, I think, you know, they have completely accepted that same stereotype as gospel, that there was this golden period. And it's in Donald Trump's political framing, stupid politicians and greedy elites ruined it for all of us. It's also hysterical that the marginal tax rate at the time was 90%. Well, it's a little bit of an economic argument against Trumpism, but that's a different.
Would you say that, you know, your tax rate was 90% and stuff like that? But there's, you know, as a communist European here, Vincent, I think there's an argument to be made to bring those taxes back up so you can, you know, rebuild the infrastructure that made America great, you know, in the first place. I mean, that is one of the wonderful ironies of all the Trump supporters you talk about, you know. I mean, they've now taken to call it Marxism. I'm not sure why. That's the insult du jour. It used to be communism. Now it's Marxism, I guess. I'm not sure. But yeah, that is the irony. Oh my God, socialism failed. Socialism the worst. The 1950s, this utopia is backed by high tax rates and, as we said, incredible amounts of government spending. Governments are funding every aspect of the lives of these GIs once they come home. But there's another aspect of Trump's upbringing, which I think is very, very, very American and really struck a chord with me. Mary Trump talks about this. There's some other sources that talk about it too. As we said, Donald Trump's mother, Mary, is an immigrant. Fred Trump is a second-generation immigrant. There is absolutely zero discussion in the House about being immigrants. They are Americans, full stop. Mary Trump speaks Scottish. She does not speak it at home. Fred Trump, for a while, for much of his career, believe it or not, he pretends to be of Swedish descent. Not German. Not German. Why is that? And as a family historian put it years later, quote, he had a lot of Jewish tenants, and it wasn't a good thing to be German in those days. Yeah. Now, which I think also tells you about Fred Sr.'s motivation. He is not a guy who's going to let truth or
some sort of ethnic identity get in the way of making money. If it's more profitable to be Swedish, that son of a is going to be Swedish. That's what we know. So, but yeah, I mean, that idea of people being American, my mother always tells a story. She and her twin sister were 8 or 9. They were assigned a project at school, and they were told to go home and do a report on the country that they came from. And so they went home and they told their mother, yeah, we need to do a report about the country we came from. What can you tell us about Ukraine? That's where they descend from. And their mother was horrified. And she said, no, you're not from Ukraine. You're American. You go back and tell your teacher you're not doing this report. You're an American.
Whoa.
And so they go back and tell the teacher, oh, our mom said we can't do the report. She says we're not Ukrainian, we're American. And the teacher, very gently says, well, no, look, we're all Americans. We're all in this together, but we all come from other countries. And the point of this project is to understand where we come from and discuss where we come from and all this. And they go back home to their mother and, well, the teacher said this. And mother, nope, absolutely not. You don't even acknowledge to the children that you're anything other than American. And that is a story that anecdotally I've heard in my family and kind of through other people and things like that. And that, I think, colors, maybe not Trump himself so much, his attitude towards immigration, but you can see the echoes of that sense in a lot of people, particularly from the Northeast who became Trump supporters, who are second, third, or even fourth generation immigrants, but kind of internalize that sense, right? You are supposed to be American. You are supposed to be purely American. You are supposed to be as American as possible, as fast as you can. Now, as always, I think that story lied some details, but I can think of one in my family, which maybe we'll keep private. But that is another theme and another broader American theme, like we said, that his life runs against that I think still resonates today.
Vincent, what you're painting there is a fascinating insight to the American dream, really, aren't you?
Yeah, I think you can take both those things into that. Absolutely, yeah.
Immigrant made good, became a huge success, passes on all his immigrant neurosis to his son.
Thank God that never happened in my family.
No Irish American there, no. So what's Donald like at this stage?
It depends a little bit on who's telling the story and your perspective. Right. Maggie Haberman, who's a journalist who has covered him for over 10 years now, she actually has released a new book this week. She wrote in her 2022 book, which is called Confidence Man, that at 5 years old, Donald Trump was found throwing rocks at a neighbor's baby.
Well, Vincent, I have to say I'm not surprised, to be honest.
I didn't think you would be.
I haven't, I didn't know this, but I'm not going to be surprised if you say he was torturing animals as well, I'd like to be perfectly honest.
Yeah, I don't think it's quite that bad, but there are...
But throwing rocks at a baby is...
That's pretty rough.
Yeah, it's pretty rough. I think it's... I'm sure you can do some psychoanalyst.
I don't think that's not even like psychoanalyst. That's like, you've had kids that age. Sometimes they have children in their social circle and you see them, you're like, just get away from my kid.
Yeah.
I know you're 5. I shouldn't actively dislike a 5-year-old, but you're a psychopath.
Yeah, of course, yes.
And there are other stories, that he's a bully to other children and to Robert, his younger brother. I think those stories seem relatively numerous and verified. But there is the idea, which I'm sure some listeners are going to not want to hear me say, this is something people say in America. I'm sure they say in Ireland too, right? It was a different time. Boys acted different then.
Yeah.
And I think that applies.
Yes, I was going around throwing rocks at children all the time as well.
Well, I'm not, okay. That's fair. His general attitude to me, that horrific incident aside, he sounds kind of like I've known a lot of wealthy kids. In that sense, they're a little entitled. They kind of don't think the rules apply to them. They act out. They can be bullies. I've seen that story before. And there are also friends who describe him as generous and kind and earnest and curious. There are stories that he wanted to go to Hollywood. He was interested in getting into the movie business. The stories from his childhood, I think, are just like so much of the rest of his life where people are just going to look at it and see what they want to see.
Yeah.
Right. If you despise Trump, you're going to look at it and you're going to see at 5 a baby with welts all over her poor head and go, yep, this is where it started. He was rotten from the jump. And if you're a supporter, you're going to say, well, 5-year-olds do things. And, he wasn't a bully. He was just tough. And, it was New York in the 50s, and that's how the world was. But whatever he is like leads to a pretty formative thing. When he is 13 years old, he is sent to military school.
No, Vincent, let me stop you in your tracks right there.
Yeah.
This is a bit of an alien concept to us in Ireland in particular. What exactly is military school?
Military schools of the type that Trump attended, which is called New York Military Academy, they are private, independent institutions. They are not part of the United States military. And you live essentially as you would, as if you were part of the United States military. Right. There are hierarchies. There are ranks. You are up every day at 5:30 or 6 o'clock, whatever it is. You are making your bed with perfect corners. You are living the life of a military man on base, only you are 13 years old.
Okay. Why was he sent there? It sounds like a tough place, like 13 years of age and going to something called military school.
It is a very tough place. And I will tell you a perception that I had growing up. And from what I can tell from a couple sources, the perception was absolutely the same then. Military school was a place that you were sent to if you were so out of control that your parents literally had no other options. If you were 13 years old in northern New Jersey in the 1990s and you found out somebody went to military school, your thoughts went to exactly what you said. Oh, man, I wonder, was he torturing animals? Your assumption would be that there was something to the level that the authorities might have gotten involved. In some cases, I think more before my time, this was a quiet backdoor thing with the judge. You have a friendly family court judge. We're not going to put him in the system, but he's got to go to military school. It was seen as a place, as a last resort for children who are out of control. The catch with Donald Trump, however, is I don't think we have quite the evidence to suggest that it was really that bad. As far as I can tell, there really isn't a satisfactory, concrete answer as to why Fred Trump, and it would have been Fred Trump making that decision. This is not a household where the husband and wife spent hours communicating over the plans for their children. Why he made that decision. One of his close friends put it best years later. Peter Brandt told the Washington Post in 2016, quote, I always said to myself, is there something I didn't know about his past that would make his father send him to the military academy? And that's the same sense that I get, quite honestly, looking at the story. Is there something we don't know that drives this decision? There is a story that goes around from one of Donald's close friends at the time that Fred found a knife collection that Donald had secretly built on trips to Manhattan. But even that, like in 1959, 13-year-old American boys have knife collections. I think at the risk of oversimplifying, I think they're almost expected to have knife collections. All the magazines they're reading that have stories of cowboys and Indians and stuff, they're advertising knives that they'll ship right to their door. Even one of Trump's biographers, who's not sympathetic to Donald as a child or as an adult, he wrote that it was, quote, a severe response for a child who, in his words, was essentially, quote, a smart aleck.
Does Donald Trump ever talk about it himself?
He does. He winds up framing it as something necessary. He told the Washington Post that, quote, I was a wise guy and they wanted to get me in line, which is interesting because he is kind of, I think, telling the same story that some of his biographers are, right? A 13-year-old wise guy, someone who's not listening well enough. It's someone who's not paying attention in school. It's things like that. Someone who has 8-inch knives hidden under their mattress. He does say in retrospect that it was a good experience, that it worked, that it gave him some level of discipline. But again, from the outside, it seems strange. It seems like an overreaction from Fred Trump. And there is one possible reason why Fred Trump might be overreacting and why he might have suddenly decided that Donald needs some real discipline. And that reason has nothing to do with the behavior of Donald Trump, but rather the behavior of his older brother, Fred Trump's namesake.
And we will get to that story about Fred Trump Jr. in part 2 next Tuesday. It's a story that's fascinating in its own merits, but one I think very clearly changes the trajectory of Donald Trump's life. and might even be the reason we're talking about Donald Trump at all. We'll be back on Friday. Until then, I'm Tull from the Irish Politics Newsletter.
I'm Vince Martin from Wall Street in Maine. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much. Bye-bye.